Chapter 30. 6. The Second Prince. After staying for only one night, Liu Feng and his two companions bid farewell the next morning and continued their journey to Xuejing City. 3 days later. The capital city, the snowy capital. This city truly lives up to its reputation as the first and most magnificent city on the continent, standing for 1,000 years. The entire city is square in shape, with city walls stretching for hundreds of miles, seemingly without end. This colossal city has 16 gates in each of the 4 cardinal directions to barely alleviate the pressure of the flow of people. However, even so, the people and officials entering and leaving the city every day still crowd at the various city gates and are forced to form long queues, stranded outside of the 16 passages, for nobles. However, apart from imperial relatives, only officials of the 7th rank or above and the sons of officials of the 3rd rank or above who have received imperial favor are allowed to pass through. Others are not permitted to pass. Of the 3, only Yi Xianxian was qualified to enter and exit the noble passage because her father was the lord of Xianzhou Prefecture, a high-ranking official of the 2nd rank in the empire, whom even the emperor had to rely on, so he could come and go as he pleased. As for Liu Feng, although he was considered a nobleman, in a place like the capital, he could only be regarded as a minor local nobleman and could not be compared with the high-ranking officials and nobles in the capital. As for Mr. Su, although he was well known, he had long since retired from official positions. Therefore, they could only queue up like ordinary people. They queued for 2 whole hours, and it was almost evening before it was finally their turn. When the city guards saw the star chaser, their expressions changed slightly. Usually, carriages of his caliber were reserved for people of high status and position, people they couldn't afford to offend and were not to be underestimated. Mr. Su lifted the curtain, took out a token from his waist and handed it to the soldier, saying, "We come from Xianzhou Academy, here to participate in the special civil service examination held by the Empire, as ordered by His Majesty. So, you are scholars taking the imperial examination. Please come in." The soldier's expression immediately became much more respectful. He had heard about this imperial civil service examination, which could be described as an unprecedented event. Among these scholars, there was a high possibility that future academicians would emerge. These people were potential candidates to become the 3 dukes and prime ministers. Perhaps one day, they would become the backbone of the empire, so he must not offend them. Without encountering any obstacles, the carriage drove smoothly into Xuejing City. Although Liu Feng had heard of the prosperity of Xuejing City before, he was still taken aback when he actually entered the city. Even though it was only dusk, the lights of thousands of homes had already illuminated the dark streets as if it were daytime. The crowds were bustling about, some with their arms around each other, some standing in front of stalls, and some pointing and gesturing, creating a lively scene. Everywhere you look, you see people dressed in fine clothes, including nobles, but most are ordinary people. This naturally highlights the wealth of the people of Xuejing, but it also reveals their vanity. If this chasing the stars and chasing the moon carriage were in another prefecture, it might have attracted a lot of attention, but here, almost no one even glanced at it. This is because such carriages are so common that nobles of some status and even wealthy merchants all ride in them, and people have long been numb to them. Following the street, the carriage arrived at a solemn and elegant building. "We've arrived. Get out of the carriage." Mr. Su smiled at the 2 of them, got off the carriage first, and started talking to the soldiers guarding the gate in front of the building. Liu Feng and Yi Xianxian also jumped off the carriage one after the other and began to carefully examine the building in front of them. The building in front of us can be described as ancient and simple, standing over 3 zhang tall. It looks quite magnificent from the outside, but we'll have to go inside to find out exactly how big it is. The large, red gate bore 3 powerful characters, Chongwen Hall, and was guarded by 2 soldiers. It must have been an office of the empire. After exchanging words with the 2 soldiers for a while, Mr. Su seemed to have settled things. He then waved to Liu Feng and the other man, signaling them to enter the Chongwen Hall together. This Chongwen Academy was recently established by His Majesty to attract scholars and literati from all over the country and to reverse the current trend of emphasizing military affairs over literature in the empire. Therefore, it was named Chongwen because it is a special academy built for scholars in the capital. As they approached the academy, Mr. Su explained to the two of them. Upon hearing this, Liu Feng couldn't help but nod. It seemed that Emperor Qingqian was truly determined to promote literature and suppress military power. Many of his policies were aimed at cultivating scholars. It seemed that he had had enough of the arrogance of the military and was determined to change the situation. Several of the empire's generals were sword sect experts, not only possessing terrifyingly high cultivation levels, but also commanding astonishingly large armies. If it weren't for their fear of the falling snow sword sect's reputation, it's questionable whether they would continue to be loyal to the royal family. We'll be staying here for the next few days during the written exam. Everything has been arranged for us. As Liu Feng pondered this, a steward appeared in front of him to guide the way. Under the supervision of the manager, each person was assigned a room next to the others so that they could communicate at any time. Mr. Su glanced at the two of them and said, "The exam is scheduled for the day after tomorrow. Take a good rest these 2 days. I will let you know if anything happens." Understood. The two nodded and watched the other person enter the room. After Mr. Su left, Yi Xianxian slowly turned around, seemingly preparing to go inside to rest. However, she was interrupted by Liu Feng's calm voice. "Mr. Su is old and needs to rest. Are you going back to your room to rest as well?" "Then what else should we do?" the girl asked suspiciously. "Such a beautiful day and scenery. How can we waste it indoors? Why don't you come out for a walk with me? At least take a tour of Chongwen Hall first?" Liu Feng stepped forward and suggested with a somewhat eager look in his eyes. "Okay." Yi Xianxian didn't object and agreed immediately. As the two walked into the courtyard, the beautiful scenery inside Chongwen Hall was instantly revealed, and the questions that Liu Feng had left behind when he entered were answered at this moment. The courtyard was very spacious. The first thing that caught the eye was a small lake that looked like a mirror. Around the lake, there were blooming flowers, lush green grass, and towering ancient trees that seemed to reach into the clouds, all complementing each other perfectly and creating a beautiful scene. Along the lake, there were many young men and women, seemingly chatting, but also frequently bursting into laughter. The appearance of the two quickly attracted the attention of many people. Almost everyone's eyes lit up at the same time, not because they saw Liu Feng, but because they saw the stunning girl next to him, Yi Xianxian. "Young lady, you must also be a scholar coming to the capital to take the civil service examination. I am Sun Yuan from Dengzhou Prefecture. It's a pleasure to meet you." After saying this, the man shamelessly extended his palm, wanting to shake hands with Yi Xianxian. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Liu Feng grabbed the outstretched hand, his face beaming with smiles. Instead of shaking the beautiful woman's hand, he grasped a man's hand. Sun Yuan's expression immediately darkened, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. "Who are you?" "I am Liu Feng from Kanglan County, and I am also a scholar here to participate in this literary examination." Liu Feng still had a smile on his face. "Oh." Upon hearing this, Sun Yuan felt even more contempt for Liu Feng. His Sun family was one of the most prominent families in Dengzhou Prefecture, incomparable to those small families in the counties. Although he thought this in his heart, Sun Yuan still maintained a polite demeanor, cupped his hands, and said, "So, it's Brother Liu. I've heard so much about you." Liu Feng returned the greeting, but inwardly cursed, "Long time no see, my foot." This person probably only learned his name a second ago. Of course, these were just polite words, and Liu Feng treated them like a fart, letting them pass by. Are all these people here scholars who have come from all over the country to take the civil service exam? Liu Feng glanced at the small groups of people in the distance and couldn't help but ask. Upon hearing this, Sun Yuan glanced at Liu Feng with some suspicion. Seeing that Liu Feng's expression didn't seem to be feigned, he then asked, "Does Your Excellency not know about tonight's events?" "Oh, I'd like to hear more." A hint of surprise flashed in Liu Feng's eyes. Sun Yuan glanced at Yi Xianxian, and when he saw that she also shook her head, he looked at the two of them with a strange expression. The second prince will be here tonight. Scholars from almost all 12 prefectures have been gathered here to gather and exchange ideas through literature. The second prince? To make friends through literature? Liu Feng's expression changed. Chapter 37, Making Friends Through Literature. The second prince, Li Xiaoyan, is the second son of the current emperor. He is not only fond of poetry and literature and has a reputation for being courteous to scholars, but also has extremely high talent and cultivation. Although he is only 20 years old, he has already reached the level of a first-order swordsman. Such talent is extremely rare in the Northern Snow Empire. However, despite his talent in both literature and martial arts and his high regard for the current emperor, he is still just a prince, far from the throne. The crown prince, although slightly inferior in many aspects, is the eldest son of the legitimate wife and his performance is decent, so his position is naturally unshakable. Even though Liu Feng was in a small place like Kanglin County, he still knew something about the conflict between the crown prince and the second prince. The crown prince's side was mostly composed of powerful families and military clans in the capital, while the second prince had won over many local prefects and a large number of civil officials. The two sides were basically at loggerheads, and neither would give way. But is it possible that His Highness the second prince of the empire, a strong contender for the current throne, is going to grace this courtyard with his presence tonight? However, Liu Feng thought about it and understood. The reason why the second prince did this was to win over these scholars and even the civil officials behind them. Then I must meet this second prince. Although Liu Feng had no interest in these people vying for the throne, now that he knew about this, if he didn't participate in this so-called literary gathering, the second prince might easily misunderstand it as disrespecting him. So, he should try his best to participate. After exchanging a few casual words with Sun Yuan, a commotion suddenly broke out in the courtyard. At the entrance to the courtyard, a group of neatly armored guards led the way. Behind them, a handsome young man in black robes came into view, and surrounded by a group of palace maids, he gradually entered the courtyard. The second prince is here. Sun Yuan's eyes lit up. After saying this to Liu Feng and the other man, he went to greet the young man in black. With the arrival of the second prince, the atmosphere in the courtyard became exceptionally lively. Guards and maids presented wine jugs and fruit platters, and soon the courtyard became an excellent place to enjoy the night view. Please take your seats, everyone. A guard beside the second prince called out loudly. The scholars each found a seat they liked and took their places. Let's go over there too. With Yi Xianxian by their side, Liu Feng and his companion joined the group of scholars. The second prince raised the wine cup that was already full in front of him. Today, I am honored to gather with you scholars to discuss poetry and literature and make friends through literature. Come, let's all drink to that. Come, let me toast the second prince. I'll drink first as a sign of respect. In an instant, all the scholars raised their wine cups and drank them down in one gulp. After finishing his cup of wine, Liu Feng turned his gaze to the second prince. The man's expression was somewhat serene, much like a farmer resting in the fields. He exuded an aura of tranquility and peace, as if he had long been weary of everything around him and was no longer interested in worldly affairs. If no one knew the other's true identity, everyone might assume that the person sitting in front of them was a prince who was detached from worldly affairs and had little interest in the throne. Unfortunately, the truth is quite the opposite. The fact that this person in front of us is the subject of almost universal knowledge regarding his open and covert struggles with the crown prince is undeniable. Liu Feng shook his head. This could only mean one thing. This person was too cunning. Despite his strong desire for power, he could still put on a cynical and indifferent attitude. This showed that his disguise was so skillful that every action he took could contradict his true feelings. This was the real deal. Such people are like venomous snakes in the jungle, extremely dangerous. It seems I shouldn't have too much contact with this person. Liu Feng frowned. Originally, he was still considering waiting and seeing what this prince, who was rumored to be courteous to scholars, was really like. If the other party was truly like that, then he might be willing to befriend him. However, the other party's current appearance made him give up on that idea. So this person is the second prince. At this moment, Yi Xianxian suddenly spoke up. Liu Feng frowned. You know this person? I wouldn't call myself an acquaintance. Yi Xianxian simply shook her head and remained silent. Seeing this, Liu Feng's eyes flashed with surprise. But since the other party didn't say anything, he couldn't press for details. He could only suppress his doubts and find an opportunity to ask in detail later. Half an hour later, in the blink of an eye, after several rounds of drinks, it was time to get down to business. At the second prince's instruction, a guard stepped forward and announced loudly, "Distinguished scholars, the second prince has invited you here today primarily to exchange ideas through literature and see who among you possesses the best literary talent and the greatest ability. The one who does so will receive the second prince's strong support, and winning the championship will not be difficult." As soon as he finished speaking, the scholars' eyes lit up, and they were all eager to try their luck. If they could get the support of the second prince, they would basically have won over several examiners, which would greatly increase their chances of entering the Hanlin Academy. I see. Liu Feng finally understood. The second prince's visit today was to assess the literary skills of these scholars and then find the most outstanding one to recruit into his camp. In this way, he would have another capable assistant in the Hanlin Academy. Thinking of this, Liu Feng smiled faintly. It seemed that he didn't need to participate in this literary gathering. He had no interest in becoming the second prince's lackey. I invite all scholars to use their talents and speak freely. Next, I would like to ask the second prince to set the question. Upon hearing this, everyone turned their attention back to the second prince. This literary gathering will take the form of couplets. I will present the first line, and you will each provide the second line. What do you all think? The second prince said with a smile. We have no objection. Most of the scholars nodded. Matching couplets is the best way to test a person's literary talent, because a couplet will not only have one second line, but many different second lines, which will show who is better and who is worse, and a discerning person can tell at a glance. They usually enjoy composing poems and couplets, so matching couplets is not difficult for them. Very good. The second prince glanced at everyone, his smile undiminished. Then, everyone, please listen carefully. The first line of my couplet is, "A small bridge stands alone, no shadows fall on the flowing river." What a great couplet! As soon as the second prince finished speaking, many scholars' eyes lit up, and they immediately began to ponder. Some remained silent, some pointed to the stars and looked at the sky, and some muttered to themselves. Their expressions varied, but they were all thinking quickly. Before a cup of tea could be brewed, someone spoke up first. A song of rainbows, the melody unfinished, the old friend departs. The beautiful costumes, the singing and dancing, the farewell of old friends, a wonderful scene. However, many scholars soon shook their heads. At first glance, the second line seemed to connect, but it only matched in form and not in meaning. In fact, they did not understand the meaning of independence in the first line. The two words, one song, in the second line seemed to be somewhat mismatched. Therefore, this couplet could only be considered an ordinary work and not a masterpiece. Just a few breaths later, someone came up with another couplet. Singing to the bright moon, tears flow before the zither strings are plucked. Upon hearing this couplet, the people around the scholar nodded in agreement. Although the couplet was not perfectly crafted, it matched the intended meaning. That's interesting. As several excellent second lines were produced, the scholars' enthusiasm was gradually aroused, the atmosphere became more and more lively, and many people's thoughts became clearer. Soon someone came up with another couplet. Leaning alone on the railing, her slender body remains still as the breeze moves. What a wonderful second line! What a wonderful second line, someone immediately exclaimed. Fishing alone on a cold river, the fish hide where boats pass by. The number of couplets increased, but the second prince remained silent with a faint smile, seemingly still dissatisfied with these second lines. However, in this chaotic moment, a clear, melodious female voice suddenly rang out. Sleeping alone in a hotel, my soul once followed my hometown in dreams. Alone in an inn, yet still filled with thoughts of home in my dreams. This couplet is truly exquisite. This couplet is simply a masterpiece, a perfect match. The moment those words were spoken, everyone was shocked, and they all turned to look at the source of the voice. Liu Feng glanced helplessly at Yi Xianxian beside him and said, "Can we keep quiet?" Chapter 38 Breakup. Is it her? A hint of hidden joy flashed in the second prince's eyes when he saw the blue-clad figure. After saying that, to the slightly surprised looks of the scholars, he actually stood up and walked towards where Yi Xianxian was. When Liu Feng saw this scene, he frowned. What was this second prince trying to do? Xianxian, the second prince suddenly spoke as he approached the two of them. Such an intimate way of addressing each other made Liu Feng frown even more. Could there be some deeper relationship between these two? Of course, the answer lay with the girl. Liu Feng also turned his gaze to the blue-clad figure, his eyes filled with a question. However, before Yi Xianxian could speak, the second prince smiled and said, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming to the capital? I was planning to give you a proper welcome. Did you arrive today?" Upon hearing this, Yi Xianxian frowned slightly, seemingly disliking the second prince's words. She said in a light tone, "Your Highness holds a prestigious position and is busy with many affairs. How could I, a mere woman, dare to disturb your Highness with such a trivial matter?" "Don't say that. Your business is my business. Come, sit next to me." The second prince was very enthusiastic and finally made a polite gesture of invitation. The second prince's actions naturally sparked much discussion among the scholars. Who is this woman? How could she win the favor of the second prince? A woman asked indignantly. That's Yi Xianxian, the only daughter of Yi Tianhao, the lord of Xianzhou Prefecture. She's a prodigy, beautiful and talented. How can you compare to her?" The male scholar next to him sneered. The woman was still somewhat unconvinced and said coldly, "If it weren't for the fact that her father is the lord of Xianzhou, would the second prince have taken a liking to her? I think the second prince just wants to use her to win over the lord of Xianzhou." "That's true." The man did not refute it. This is beyond doubt. Royal family members are the most ruthless and heartless. They have no real feelings. The second prince's goodwill towards Yi Xianxian is just to bind Yi Tianhao to his side, in order to strengthen his own power and thus make it easier for him to compete for the throne. Even so, the other party had no room to resist. The second prince's invitation was not something you could refuse at will. Just as Yi Xianxian was in a dilemma, a shocking statement came from beside her. "I'm sorry, Xianxian is my companion. I hope the second prince will not make things difficult for her." The speaker was none other than Liu Feng. These words were like igniting a powder keg, immediately causing a strong reaction among the scholars. Who is this brat, daring to directly confront the second prince? He's got guts, but he's also incredibly foolish. He's already offended the second prince with this one move. He's got lust in his head, doing something so stupid for a woman. For a moment, the scholars were abuzz with discussion. Some sneered, some sympathized, and some mocked. Most of them shook their heads, clearly feeling that Liu Feng's actions were too reckless. "You mean I made things difficult for her?" The second prince's face revealed a half-smile, a hint of coldness flashing in his eyes. This kid really doesn't know what's good for him. "Liu Feng, let's go." Seeing the tense atmosphere, a hint of worry flashed in Yi Xuanxuan's eyes. However, her words did not ease the atmosphere. Instead, they seemed to exacerbate the conflict. The second prince's expression grew even colder, and after scrutinizing Liu Feng for a long time, he finally asked, "What's your name?" Those who could come here were basically scholars who came to take the civil service exam. There were very few unfamiliar faces in the entire empire who dared to confront him. Moreover, judging from the fact that Liu Feng was only at the 3rd level, he was definitely not one of those people. "My name is Liu Feng." Liu Feng cupped his hands slightly, neither humble nor arrogant. Even though the person in front of him held a high position and great power, in his view, This second prince had touched something that should not be touched. Yi Xianxian belonged only to him, and even if the other party did not like him, he did not want the woman he liked to become a victim of the royal power struggle. Liu Feng? You have a lot of courage, the second prince chuckled, but there was a chilling undertone in his laughter. However, you've misplaced your courage. You must be here to take the written exam, but unfortunately, you have no chance of making it into the top 3 this time. Oh right, you never really had any chance anyway. From these words, everyone could tell that the second prince was angry, and the consequence of that anger was that Liu Feng was directly deprived of his chance to enter the top 3. Upon hearing this, the scholars reacted in various ways. Some felt sorry for him, while most were gloating. This hothead dared to oppose the second prince. This was his fate. I recall that this written examination wasn't decided by Your Highness, was it? The real decision-making power still rests with His Majesty the Emperor. Does Your Highness now possess that power? Liu Feng asked expressionlessly. In the Imperial Civil Service examination, the second prince only controlled a group of examiners. People like the 3 dukes and the Prime Minister still played a leading role. Of course, the final decision-making power was still in the hands of the Emperor. So, simply put, the second prince only had partial voting power. He could play a role in pushing things along, but he did not have the authority to decide Liu Feng's success or failure. How about we take a gamble? The second prince's smile remained unchanged, but the guards beside her knew that their master was actually truly enraged. If you make it into the top 3, I'll pretend today never happened. If you don't, you'll have to get out of Xuanxuan's sight and never appear in front of her again. Do you dare to bet with me? The second prince kept his eyes fixed on Liu Feng. As long as the other party uttered a single word of refusal, it would be a sign of submission to his authority, and then this person would be no threat. Such a spineless person was not worth his attention, and there were many ways to crush him. If Liu Feng agreed, he would be even more at ease. With his methods, he would use his influence among the civil officials to put pressure on the 3 high-ranking officials and prime ministers, and would not give Liu Feng the slightest chance. Therefore, regardless of whether the other party agrees or not, he will be the winner. This is a trap, a scheme, and Liu Feng has no choice but to fall in. All eyes were now on Liu Feng, eager to see how he would choose between these 2 difficult options. I accept. To everyone's surprise, Liu Feng agreed almost without hesitation. Liu Feng. Yi Xianxian tugged at his sleeve anxiously from the side. Over the years, they had gone through many ups and downs, and she had developed a liking for the young man in front of her. Sometimes he would recite poems, sometimes he would fight evil with his sword, and sometimes he would be very unserious. Liu Feng's image had been deeply imprinted in her heart and could not be erased. If we can never see each other again, that would undoubtedly be a very painful thing. Don't worry, I'm confident. Liu Feng patted the other's shoulder and smiled. I don't know where your confidence comes from, but I will destroy it bit by bit. You won't have the slightest chance, the second prince said coldly. You don't need to worry about that. Liu Feng was somewhat noncommittal. He was tired of hearing such harsh words. However, this means I won't be able to sleep in tomorrow. I'll need to do some things. Chapter 39 Transactions. The next morning, Liu Feng left Chongwen Hall early. Today, he was going to do something he didn't really want to do, but had to do. Now, he can be said to have stood on the opposite side of the second prince, so he can only seek help from another person. This person may not necessarily help him, but Liu Feng is absolutely confident in persuading him. This person is none other than the current crown prince. In the eastern part of Xuejing City, at the Imperial Grand Restaurant. As one of the largest restaurants in the capital, its magnificent exterior alone is enough to fascinate people. It is a paradise for the rich, gathering a considerable number of high-ranking officials and nobles. Imperial celebrities and upper-class nobles can be seen almost everywhere here, because in addition to drinking, there are many other entertainment activities available, making it the perfect place for these people to spend lavishly. The owner of this imperial capital restaurant is none other than His Majesty the Emperor's eldest son, the Crown Prince. This was hardly a secret in the Empire. Even many ordinary people in Snow Capital knew about it. For example, The second prince also owned a Snow Kingdom Grand Restaurant, and the crown prince needed a tool for gathering intelligence and raising funds. This was something that imperial laws did not allow, but His Majesty the Emperor, who was high above all others, seemed to have no intention of interfering. So, after making some inquiries, Liu Feng successfully found the window to contact the crown prince, which was this restaurant in front of him. The gatekeepers merely glanced at Liu Feng and let him pass, without stopping him. Their task was to allow people other than nobles and the wealthy to enter, and judging from Liu Feng's appearance, he was clearly dressed as a noble young master, so he naturally did not belong to this category. Upon entering the restaurant, Liu Feng was immediately struck by the strong scent of perfume and cosmetics in the air, a fragrance unique to women. Interspersed among the groups of nobles were alluring women dressed in light gauze, their breasts partially exposed, their faces like peach blossoms, exuding amorous charm. Even though Liu Feng had been a recluse in his previous life, he instantly understood what these women did for a living. "Welcome to the Imperial Capital Restaurant. May I ask what you need, sir?" As soon as Liu Feng appeared, a middle-aged woman, still charming and attractive, came forward to greet him. "Please take me to see your boss." Liu Feng wasn't here for entertainment, so he had no interest in this decadent aristocratic entertainment and went straight to the point. Upon hearing this, a hint of surprise flashed in the beautiful young woman's eyes, but she concealed it very well, and it disappeared without a trace in just a moment. She smiled and said, "I'm sorry, our boss is not here today." "Really not here?" Liu Feng's lips curled into a smile, and then he flipped his hand, revealing a token. Liu Feng handed over the token and smiled. "I have important business to attend to. You can't afford to delay something like this." The beautiful young woman took the token with some suspicion, but when she saw the character Yi on the token, her expression suddenly changed, and she covered her cherry-like mouth in surprise. "Can I see your boss now?" Liu Feng asked with a faint smile. "Please follow me." The young woman nodded, a strange glint still lingering in her eyes. Liu Feng secretly rejoiced that he had borrowed a manor lord's token from Yi Xianxian when he came. Otherwise, he might not have even been able to see the restaurant owner, let alone the crown prince behind him. Following behind the young woman, after turning several corners, they gradually moved away from the noisy environment and arrived at the backyard of the restaurant. After passing through an artificial hill and crossing the lakeside, the two arrived at a quiet and elegant residence. "Please wait a moment, young master, while I go and inform him." After learning of Liu Feng's connection to the Xianzhou prefecture lord, the beautiful young woman's attitude became extremely respectful. After all, a prefecture lord was a powerful figure even the crown prince sought to win over. Before long, the beautiful young woman came out and summoned Liu Feng inside. The furnishings inside the room were simple yet elegant. Around the room were some rare and precious antiques. Although they were placed casually, Liu Feng could vaguely tell that they were all priceless works of art. On the main seat, a slightly plump middle-aged man in yellow robes came into view. Upon seeing Liu Feng, he asked with some interest, "Who are you, kid? Why do you have Lord Ye's token?" Imperial law clearly stipulates that a prefecture lord can only forge 3 prefecture lord tokens. Those who possess a prefecture lord token can enjoy privileges such as exemption from punishment and death. Therefore, prefecture lord tokens are extremely precious, and generally only those who have a very close relationship with the prefecture lord are qualified to possess this token. "You don't need to know that, Your Highness. I'm here today to discuss something very important with His Highness the Crown Prince," Liu Feng said expressionlessly. "Oh." The portly middle-aged man looked slightly surprised, then chuckled, and a mocking smile appeared on his lips. "Does His Highness the Crown Prince look like someone you can just see whenever you want? If you have something to say, you can tell me first, and I can pass it on for you." Okay. Liu Feng didn't necessarily want to see the Crown Prince in person. He knew that it wouldn't be easy to see the Crown Prince. He just needed someone in charge who could convey his message. "Then I'll get straight to the point," Liu Feng said, getting straight to the point. "You should know that tomorrow is the day His Majesty will hold the special civil service examination. At that time, 30 scholars from the 12 prefectures and the Imperial Academy in the capital will participate in the examination, and I am one of them. So you're a scholar. The portly middle-aged man smiled. It seems you've come here to seek refuge with the Crown Prince. Liu Feng shook his head. It's not about seeking refuge. I won't seek refuge with anyone. I'm only here to make a deal with His Highness the Crown Prince. A trade? Interesting. The middle-aged man was somewhat surprised. Among the teenagers he had met, this was the first time anyone had used the word trade. Most of the people who usually came to see him wanted to curry favor with the Crown Prince and advance their careers, so they were generally obsequious in his presence. Liu Feng was the first one who remained neither humble nor arrogant. As far as I know, more than 20 of the 30 scholars have already joined the second prince's ranks. The Crown Prince only has a few incompetent scholars who are no match for the second prince. I am here to help His Highness the Crown Prince out of this predicament. The Crown Prince uses his connections to help me, and I will defeat the scholars under the second prince's command for him. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement, and I think His Highness the Crown Prince would be happy to agree to it. After listening to Liu Feng's explanation, the middle-aged man's expression gradually became serious. This special civil service examination had indeed been a major headache for the Crown Prince's faction recently, because most of the civil officials had already sided with the second prince. Among the 7 scholars in the Hanlin Academy, only 2 supported the Crown Prince. If the second prince were to secure another spot, it would be even more disadvantageous for the Crown Prince's side. After all, the Hanlin Academy was the central hub of imperial decision-making, and the scholars were the heads of the Hanlin Academy, holding extremely important positions. The middle-aged man frowned. The premise of the deal is that you have the ability to defeat the scholars of the second prince's faction. Why should I believe you have that ability? Believe me, there's still a glimmer of hope for me. Otherwise, the Crown Prince would have no chance of winning at all, Liu Feng said calmly, then uttered a statement that utterly shocked the other party. If the Crown Prince is willing to help, I am absolutely confident that I can win. Liu Feng estimated that the chief examiners for tomorrow's civil service examination would be the 3 dukes and the prime minister, along with 7 scholars who would evaluate the performance of the 30 scholars. They would determine the merits and rankings of the scholars, but the final decision would still rest with the emperor. However, imagine if all 10 people rejected Liu Feng, he would definitely have no chance. But if he got the support of the 3 ministers of the emperor, the result would be different, and he would still have a chance to catch the emperor's eye. You just need to tell the Crown Prince what he said. Whether he wants to take a gamble or just watch himself lose to the second prince is up to him. After saying that, Liu Feng turned and left, leaving only the middle-aged man deep in thought in the empty room. Chapter 40. The Imperial Examination. To the north of Shuejing City stands the Imperial City of the Empire, with a vast complex of palaces stretching endlessly, thick city walls, and yellow eaves like swords, revealing the Empire's majestic grandeur. Beneath the heavily guarded gates, deep within the palace walls, the yellow glazed tiles gleamed golden in the sunlight. The vermilion walls inexplicably exuded a sense of oppression, suffocating the senses. East Palace, Wuying Hall. Inside the luxurious room, a handsome young man was resting with his eyes closed. 2 palace maids were attending to him, while not far in front of him stood a slightly plump middle-aged man, reporting something to the young man. That Liu Feng is quite interesting. He doesn't want to join my sect, but he wants my help. He's dreaming. The young man wore a bright yellow robe. Although he didn't look well, and his face was a little pale, his eyes were very sharp, like those of a hawk. This is Li Yanfeng, the current crown prince, the heir apparent of the empire, and the future most powerful person in the world. The middle-aged man was the owner of the Imperial Capital restaurant, but in front of the crown prince, he no longer had his usual imposing manner and was behaving very humbly. So your highness means to refuse Liu Feng's request? Of course not. The crown prince shook his head. The second prince's enemies are our friends. Besides, what Liu Feng said is true. My few crooked and ugly fellows are indeed no match for the second prince's scholars. Since this person is so confident, We can give it a try. Upon hearing the promise, the middle-aged man frowned, unable to fathom his master's intentions. Say yes, the crown prince said after a moment's hesitation, but if he doesn't make it into the top 3, he'll be in danger. Not only will the second prince deal with him, but I will also give him a little punishment. The middle-aged man's heart skipped a beat, and he cupped his hands and said, "This subordinate will definitely convey the original words to Liu Feng. Go down." The crown prince waved his hand lazily, and only after the middle-aged man had completely left did he get up and look out the window, a cold glint in his eyes. The next day, outside Chongwen Hall, carriages from the imperial palace were already waiting at the gate to welcome the scholars into the palace for the examination. A dozen or so carriages headed towards the palace, forming a small convoy. Under the protection of the imperial guards, they entered the palace without hindrance. Not far from the Taiji Hall, more than 20 scholars dismounted and walked, entering the main hall under the guidance of officials from the Ministry of Rites. The morning court session had already ended, but the main hall was still packed with people, mostly officials from the Ministry of Rites and the Hanlin Academy. They were in charge of matters related to this palace examination, and they also wanted to see who the new scholars would be. It should be noted that if a scholar is selected from among these scholars, that person will be the youngest scholar in the history of the empire, because there has never been a precedent of directly granting a scholar the position of scholar. This is the first time that such a practice has been set in this dynasty. Greetings, Your Majesty. 30 scholars knelt down in unison. Liu Feng, though reluctant, had no choice but to follow suit, as it was clear that he couldn't refuse. Rise. As he stood up, his gaze swept over the eunuchs and palace maids on both sides, and Liu Feng finally saw the middle-aged man sitting on the imperial couch, wearing a golden dragon robe, his voice gentle yet powerful, and leaving no room for doubt. This is His Majesty the current Emperor of the Northern Snow Empire, Emperor Chengqian. Li Jun below the steps, the crown prince and the second prince stand on either side of him. The rules for the palace examination were not fixed and were basically decided by the emperor on the spot to avoid leaking the questions in advance. It also had another advantage. It could test the true level of the scholars, because only when they were unprepared could a person's true level be revealed. Next, the officials from the Ministry of Rites spoke a lot of high-sounding nonsense to the scholars. Of course, Liu Feng knew this was a necessary procedure, so he turned his attention to the others. Based on their seating arrangements, Liu Feng could roughly determine the positions of the 3 high-ranking officials. For example, the dark-faced old man sitting on the right should be the Grand Marshal of the current dynasty, a pillar of the government, and a supporter of Liu Feng's civil service examination. The white-haired old man sitting on the left with his eyes slightly closed must be Lord Situ, also known as the famous Master Gu Mucheng. He is revered by scholars throughout the land and is the most learned person in the entire empire. He has a lot of say in today's written examination, but unfortunately, he is on the side of the second prince. Just as Liu Feng was observing the others, the official from the Ministry of Rites also withdrew. The eunuch beside the emperor stepped forward and, in a hoarse voice, announced loudly, "Now the world is well governed and the country is at peace. The people of all directions are able to live and work in peace and enjoy lasting peace thanks to Your Majesty's wisdom. Today's examination will be on the topic of peace under heaven. Peace throughout the land?" Liu Feng frowned. This was a rather difficult question to answer. The world is far from peaceful. Monsters roam the northern snowfields, and the Luchuan Empire in the south is stirring up trouble. How can one say that the world is at peace? This title is somewhat of a laudatory one. For a moment, the court was completely silent. The question had truly caught the scholars off guard. However, there were still many talented people. Before long, a scholar's eyes lit up, and he stepped forward to recite a poem. The water lily and the goose, the mulberry and elm trees, the good man. A patch of spring chives is green, and the fragrance of rice blossoms fills the air for miles. In this prosperous age, there is no hunger or starvation, and people across the land are busy with farming and weaving. Excellent. Upon hearing this, Everyone except the Grand Marshal and a few civil officials was delighted and smiled. The person who wrote this poem was a scholar from the Imperial Academy, who was renowned for his literary talent and was a capable assistant to the Second Prince's faction. Lord Zhao, the Minister of Works, nodded. What a simple and elegant piece of writing. It captures the essence of a prosperous era through a small detail. That's good. Master Gu nodded slightly. Liu Feng nodded secretly. The scholars under the Second Prince were indeed impressive. Although their talents were not as good as Chao Ji's seven-step talent in his previous life, they were not far off. However, these people's talents went far beyond that. Soon, another scholar stepped forward and recited, enjoying the spring tide by the river in the south, the clear waves and blue waters ripple leisurely. The lotus pond is calm, and the dragonflies laugh, a beautiful scene of peace and prosperity, singing praises to the holy emperor. What a peaceful scene. This poem is also quite good. The scholars nodded in agreement. The artistic conception of this song is even better than the previous one. Master Gu's cloudy eyes lit up slightly, and he shook his head. Very good. This person can be considered one of the best among these scholars, said Lord Zhao with a look of admiration. However, no sooner had these words been uttered than a dissenting voice rang out. You two gentlemen cannot make hasty judgments. A distinguished young man stepped between the two scholars, his expression arrogant. And, behold my poem. It's him, Duanmu Yun, the most talented scholar in the capital. Someone immediately recognized the young man. This person remains silent until he speaks out, then astounds everyone with his talent. Even in the most prosperous times in the world, small towns still house thousands of families. Rice flows like oil, millet is white as snow, granaries, both public and private, are full. The emperor in the palace plays the Yunmen music, and friends all over the world are as close as glue. What a beautiful poem. If the previous two poems each had their own unique characteristics, then this one encompasses the entire universe and includes everything. Inclusiveness and magnanimity make it superior. The strength of these people is truly terrifying. Yi Xianxian suddenly spoke up next to Liu Feng. Liu Feng nodded. Indeed, these people were all highly talented scholars, and Yi Xianxian paled in comparison to them. Then your bet. Yi Xianxian looked somewhat worried. Given the current situation, it would be almost impossible for Liu Feng to win. It's all right, I'm confident, Liu Feng said casually. In the imperial court, officials were discussing the matter animatedly, while the crown prince and the second prince, who were standing beside the emperor, displayed different expressions. The second prince's face was beaming with a bright smile. The three men who had just recited the poem were all his capable assistants, and they had indeed lived up to his expectations. Meanwhile, the scholars who had sided with the crown prince all looked away and dejected, which greatly annoyed the crown prince himself. A bunch of useless trash, the crown prince cursed inwardly. This time he had lost badly. None of his scholars had uttered a single word, and he had lost face big time. However, when his gaze fell on Liu Feng, he felt a little strange, because the latter still maintained a calm expression on his face, and even had a faint smile on his face, which was in stark contrast to the disheveled expressions of the other scholars. Could this kid have some hidden trump card? The crown prince wondered. Beside him, the second prince sneered inwardly. Just putting on airs, a complete waste. Seeing that the scholars had not responded for a long time, the emperor gave a wink to the eunuch beside him. The eunuch then cleared his hoarse voice and said, The scholars' performances have been excellent, especially Scholar Duanmu. If the other scholars do not have any more outstanding works, then the three dukes and the academicians will announce. Wait, I have another humble work to share. A soft voice interrupted him. In that instant, not only the little eunuch but almost all the officials present changed color and looked at Liu Feng with some surprise. A strange light flashed in the crown prince's eyes. Was this kid about to reveal his trump card? Liu Feng feigned hesitation, and after a full half cup of tea's time, seeing that the officials present were somewhat anxious, he finally recited softly. During the peaceful reign of Emperor Qingqian, All nations celebrated the bountiful harvest. The pear garden presented old tunes, and the jade throne presented new creations. Excellent sentence. The officials' eyes lit up. The writing style is magnificent. The music is melodious and rhythmic, and the flowing robes are breathtaking. Seeing this, Liu Feng chuckled inwardly and continued reciting. The phoenix flute plays in disarray, the rosy robes sway in the breeze. The banquet ends, the water palace is empty, and the carriage remains amidst the fine spring grass. Wonderful. Even the usually listless Master Gu was somewhat moved, savoring the meaning of the poem. The affairs of Penglai have long been over, but the merit of the celestial music remains undiminished. How could they possibly heed the lingering sounds? The wise ruler knows to continue this legacy. Although the words had fallen, the lingering sentiment still resonated in everyone's hearts. Good. A loud shout startled the engrossed crowd, but after they recognized who was cheering, they dared not say anything and could only mutter their complaints inwardly. The one who cheered was none other than the Grand Marshal. Although he didn't understand the meaning of Liu Feng's poem, he could tell from the expressions of others. He wouldn't let this opportunity pass and immediately clapped and cheered for Liu Feng. What a fine poem! The Crown Prince chimed in, adding fuel to the fire. As soon as the Crown Prince spoke, the officials below him cheered in unison, instantly creating a formidable momentum. At this moment, the second prince's face turned extremely ugly, and his gaze fixed on Liu Feng was filled with a chilling intent. Chapter 41: The Pinnacle of Swordsmanship for Newly Appointed Scholar. Duanmu Yun's expression changed. He originally thought victory was assured, but he didn't expect Liu Feng to suddenly appear and make the situation very complicated. On the throne, Emperor Chengqian Li Jun's eyes flashed with a strange light. He had heard of the names of the 3 scholars before him, but he had no impression of Liu Feng at all. These 4 scholars are all quite talented in literature. We would like to ask your majesty to decide who is superior, suggested the Grand Marshal and others. Emperor Li Jun shook his head. Let the 3 dukes and scholars judge. Upon hearing this, the Grand Marshal and the others' faces darkened, their disappointment evident. They had intended to hand over the decision-making power to the emperor, which would have weakened the influence of the second prince's faction. Unfortunately, the emperor had passed the buck back to them. Those on the second prince's side secretly breathed a sigh of relief. If the emperor had made the decision himself, things might not have gone as they had expected. Please allow us a moment to discuss this. Although the 3 scholars said this, given their internal conflicts, it was clearly impossible for them to reach a consensus. They could only follow the usual practice of each writing down the rankings of the 4 people on a piece of paper, and then having the Ministry of Rights officials tally the top 3 and submit it to the emperor. This situation is clearly very unfavorable to Liu Feng, because the second prince's faction occupies 7 of the examiners, undoubtedly holding the dominant position. These people certainly will not include Liu Feng in the top 3. The review process quickly came to an end. After receiving the evaluation opinions from the 10 chief examiners, the officials from the Ministry of Rights did a quick tally and then came to the results. This result was naturally submitted to the Emperor Li Jun for announcement. However, when Emperor Chengqian Li Jun saw the list in his hand, his expression changed slightly. He glanced at Liu Feng with some surprise and then frowned, as if he had thought of something. Liu Feng, the emperor suddenly spoke, causing a stir among the officials, and even Liu Feng himself was taken aback. Your subject is here. Liu Feng bowed and greeted the emperor. I think your poetic talent is quite good, but I wonder how your prose talent is? Liu Feng seemed to understand something, and a hint of joy flashed in his eyes. Although this poem is not bad, in my opinion it is nothing special. To be honest, Your Majesty, my writing skills are 10 times better than my poetry skills. Oh! A look of surprise appeared on Li Jun's face. What? On the official side, whether it was the first prince or the second prince's faction, they all changed color. This kind of masterpiece that could be praised for hundreds of years was actually nothing in Liu Feng's mouth. Could his literary skills be so magical? Aren't you afraid of biting off more than you can chew? Duanmu Yun sneered from the side. clearly not believing that Liu Feng had such ability. Then you shall write an essay on the spot. If it is as you say, I will appoint you as the first in the palace examination. But if not, then it is the crime of deceiving the emperor, and you know the consequences. Emperor Li Jun's words were also tinged with coldness. Writing an essay on the spot is much more difficult than composing a poem on the spot, and you have to write an essay that is 10 times more exquisite than the poem. In the eyes of ordinary people, this is almost an impossible task. Your Majesty, please wait and see. Liu Feng remained calm and composed, chatting and laughing as usual. He certainly knew the consequences of deceiving the emperor. It was a crime punishable by the extermination of 3 generations of one's family. Such a crime would result in death even for a prince or a nobleman, with no chance of escaping punishment. Moreover, Liu Feng was merely the son of a marquis, and here, he was practically a commoner. All of you scholars here are my teachers, so I will use the title of this article for my essay. Liu Feng bowed slightly to the 3 dukes and the scholars. With one step forward, Liu Feng began to speak. Scholars of the past always had teachers, but scholars of today have no respect for them. A teacher is one who imparts knowledge, instructs in skills, and resolves doubts. But the teachers of today are not good teachers, nor are they proficient in their studies. Instead, they dabble in worldly disputes, attacking each other, and losing the demeanor of scholars like us. Look at the court today. It is full of sycophants who harm the virtuous and bury scholars, mistaking mediocrity for talent. They are ashamed to be teachers. These words shocked everyone present. Some were surprised, but most were furious, especially the scholars and elders from the second prince's faction. They glared at Liu Feng angrily, as Liu Feng's article clearly criticized them in a very sharp and undisguised tone. Meanwhile, Duan Muyun's face also turned extremely ugly. In Liu Feng's words, the other party was a scholar, while he had become a mediocre talent, which almost made him furious. Liu Feng completely ignored the murderous glares from these people and continued reciting as if no one else was there. As the ancient said, when 3 people walk together, one of them will surely be my teacher. Therefore, a disciple is not necessarily inferior to his teacher, nor is a teacher necessarily more virtuous than his disciple. There is a sequence in learning the way, and each has their own area of expertise. In this light, we humble people, though our knowledge is not as good as yours, can still be your teachers. The entire article is actually largely plagiarized from Han Chongli's On Teachers. Liu Feng only made slight modifications. Although there is some suspicion of slander, those few famous quotes alone are enough to cover up these shortcomings. Among the 3 dukes, the Grand Marshal looked at the others with a hint of schadenfreude, especially when he saw that Master Gu's face had turned green. He secretly rejoiced and gave Liu Feng a thumbs up. As for people like Master Gu, although they were scolded, they were helpless. What Liu Feng said was indeed true. They listed Duan Muyun first and Liu Feng fourth on the list. This was, of course, at the behest of the second prince. However, just by doing this, they had already lost the integrity of scholars. This young man is right. It seems I have indeed lost my mind these past few years and lost the true heart of a Confucian scholar. Master Gu's eyes flickered, and he sighed deeply. Then, as if he had made a decision, he said, I will no longer concern myself with the disputes in the court. For a moment, the court fell into silence, completely still. After a long pause, Emperor Li Jun broke the silence and spoke first. Although this article has flaws in its structure and wording, it is still a masterpiece that will last for 1,000 years. I have truly witnessed your literary talent. The emperor's gaze was fixed on Liu Feng, and his next words would be recorded in history. Such great talent, it would be a pity if he was a number 1. The implication is that if Liu Feng is a number 1, then who can take on that position? Father, isn't this? The second prince wanted to step forward and explain, but the emperor coldly interrupted him. My mind is made up. You don't need to say anything more. Swallowing his words back, the second prince gave Liu Feng a cold look, his eyes filled with icy intent. Liu Feng simply smiled at such looks, but a chill ran through his heart. If this second prince continued to make trouble for him in the future, even if the other party was a prince, he would fight him to the death. Seeing that even the second prince had been reprimanded by the emperor, no one else dared to offer any further advice. It was practically a foregone conclusion that Liu Feng would win the championship. At this moment, a young eunuch standing beside the emperor stepped forward and announced, "Congratulations to Liu Feng for becoming the first-place winner in this palace examination. Next, the court will hold an investiture ceremony to appoint Liu Feng as a newly promoted academician of the Hanlin Academy. All officials and scholars are welcome to attend." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone turned their attention to Liu Feng. There were expressions of amazement, envy, jealousy, and hatred, but Liu Feng didn't care about any of them. What he cared about was that he had finally fulfilled the long-cherished wish of the body's owner and reached the pinnacle of literature. At the same time, he had also brought honor to the Liu family. However, this is not what he wants. His ultimate goal is to reach the pinnacle of swordsmanship and become the strongest in this world. Therefore, he will not remain a scholar for long. Perhaps in 10 days or half a month, or perhaps tomorrow, he will resign and leave to seek his path in swordsmanship. Chapter 42: Joy Turns to Sorrow. The investiture ceremony did not end until nearly noon. However, Emperor Qingqian held a grand banquet to entertain the top 3 scholars. Of course, officials and other scholars also attended the banquet. At the banquet, Liu Feng undoubtedly became the most eye-catching figure. This youngest scholar in the history of the empire has unlimited potential for future achievements. Even though many civil officials have joined the second prince's faction, it does not prevent them from dealing with Liu Feng. Even the second prince has no power to stop them from befriending the newly promoted scholar of the Hanlin Academy. However, Liu Feng found these social obligations extremely troublesome and could only manage to cope with them. If the emperor hadn't been there, he would have fled long ago. "Liu Feng, come, let me toast you." The crown prince was in high spirits today. The appearance of Liu Feng, this dark horse, had dealt a heavy blow to the second prince and had inadvertently boosted his own reputation. Therefore, he found Liu Feng increasingly pleasing to the eye, even though the other party had not truly pledged allegiance to him. "Come." Liu Feng raised his wine cup and drank it all in one gulp. He could refuse other people's wine, but he couldn't refuse the crown prince's wine. After all, the other party had helped him, and besides, he would need to rely on the crown prince in many ways in the future to deal with the threat from the second prince. As the banquet was drawing to a close, Liu Feng was summoned to the imperial study by the emperor. Upon entering, the first thing you see is a very tall row of bookshelves against the wall. They look quite old. Although the bookshelves are a bit messy, they're filled with extremely valuable and rare books. On the desk, a few sheets of white paper are simply laid out, with what appear to be a few lines of unfinished writing on them. "Your writing is quite good," Emperor Qingqian said suddenly after he sat down. Liu Feng was taken aback for a moment, but quickly recovered and bowed, saying, "Thank you for your praise, Your Majesty. They're all copied from famous works. How could they not be good?" The emperor seemed to nod and asked, "Are you one of the crown prince's men?" "No," Liu Feng answered directly. "Oh, that's strange." Emperor Qingqian looked at Liu Feng with interest. "I see you seem to have a grudge against the second prince, but you have a good relationship with the crown prince." "The second prince does indeed have some misunderstandings with me, but my cooperation with the crown prince is only related to the palace examination. I am not one of his men," Liu Feng answered truthfully. He did not want to join the secret society, nor did he plan to join it in the future. "Is that so? Everyone else has already chosen their sides. Don't you plan to find a way to advance yourself?" The emperor raised an eyebrow. "I will show Your Majesty something, and then you will know." After speaking, Liu Feng flipped his palm, and a silver-white token appeared in his hand. On the token, a fierce snow eagle was very eye-catching. Upon seeing the token, even the usually calm emperor changed his expression and looked at the young man in front of him with some shock. This kid actually has such a hidden identity. Indeed, with this status, one cannot serve anyone else but the emperor alone. It seems you have already met your uncle. Emperor Qingqian's face regained its composure, but the shock in his heart lingered for a long time. The emperor's uncle? That old man was actually the emperor's uncle. Even though he already knew that Li Daoxian was a member of the royal family, Liu Feng never expected that the other party was actually the emperor's uncle. The emperor's uncle and ordinary members of the royal family are completely different concepts. Since he entrusted this snow god token to you, it proves that he has taken a liking to your talent, the emperor said, his eyes gleaming before a look of emotion appeared on his face. However, I'm afraid even he couldn't have imagined that you would become an imperial scholar. It's truly unbelievable. Becoming a snow god guardian requires extremely high martial arts talent, but Liu Feng also possesses extraordinary literary talent at the same time. If having one of these talents makes one a genius, then possessing both can only be described as a freak. What are your plans for the future? Do you want to become a Hanlon scholar or a true snow god guard? Liu Feng could only choose one of these two options. In the Hanlon Academy, one was essentially the emperor's secretary and did not need any swordsmanship skills. On the contrary, the snow god guard needed to carry out special missions for the empire. Such a person was clearly not suitable to be a leading figure in the empire. Liu Feng smiled faintly. These words had struck a chord with him. He had already made his choice between the two. I will resign in a couple of days, and I hope your majesty will allow it. Upon hearing this, the emperor was momentarily stunned, then laughed. A very bright laugh. You want to resign? Upon seeing that smile, Liu Feng felt a sense of danger before he could even nod. Sure enough, in just a moment, the emperor's tone changed, and the smile on his face vanished without a trace. Liu Feng, do you know your crime? Your subject does not know. Liu Feng was somewhat taken aback. Upon hearing this, the emperor's anger intensified. I have just appointed you as a newly promoted scholar, yet you say you are about to resign. If you have no intention of becoming a Hanlon scholar, why did you participate in this civil service examination? This is a serious crime of mocking the court, and you should be executed. Upon hearing the last two words, Liu Feng was startled and hurriedly knelt down on one knee, saying, Your Majesty, I know my crime and beg for your leniency. Humph. Emperor Qingqian snorted heavily, seemingly still angry. After a long while, he finally spoke. Considering that you are a member of the Snow God Guard Youth Camp and a newly appointed Hanlon academician, it would be against propriety for me to kill you now, so I will spare your life for the time being. Thank you, Your Majesty. Liu Feng breathed a sigh of relief, but before he could finish, the emperor's cold voice rang in his ears. However, you may be spared the death penalty, but you cannot escape punishment. Therefore, I had decided to remove you from your position as a scholar and exile you to the army. Huh. Liu Feng's expression changed. Wasn't being exiled to the army a bit too serious a crime? I will announce this matter at tomorrow's morning court session. Go back and prepare your luggage today. I will announce the specific destination in court, the emperor said indifferently. Liu Feng secretly lamented his misfortune, regretting that he should have participated in the special examination. He had managed to become a scholar, but he would be exiled to the frontier after only one day. What kind of situation was this? Your Majesty, please show mercy. Liu Feng still tried to struggle. There's no room for discussion, Emperor Qingqian said outright. He then turned around and said indifferently, You may leave now. Until the morning court session tomorrow, you will still be a Hanlon academician. The implication is that you can still enjoy being a bachelor today, but you'll have to obediently go to the military camp tomorrow. Liu Feng's expression was as if his mother had died. He was extremely dejected. He had originally hoped to get a sinecure at the Hanlon Academy, but he was dismissed before he even got the position. Your subject takes his leave. Having failed to persuade him, Liu Feng had no choice but to take his leave, slowly withdrawing from the imperial study. Only after Liu Feng had completely left did Emperor Qingqian slowly turn around, a faint smile on his lips, and murmur, How could you, brat, know my good intentions? Since you want to cultivate the sword path, then go ahead and cultivate it. This position of Hanlon academician will only bind you. Everyone says I value literature over martial arts, but they don't know that I simply hope that the civil and military can work together. The way of the sword is the foundation of my northern snow empire. How could I suppress it? Unfortunately, only the emperor could hear what he said. Liu Feng could not. Outside the imperial study, Yi Xianxian was still waiting quietly. When she saw Liu Feng come out, a hint of joy flashed in her eyes, and she asked impatiently, "How is it? What kind of reward did His Majesty give you?" Heh. Liu Feng forced a grim smile. A reward? He was lucky he wasn't beheaded. What exactly happened? Seeing the strange expression on the boy's face, Yi Xuanxuan's curiosity only intensified. "It is indeed an award," Liu Feng said irritably. "I was given the title of exile to the frontier. I will be sent to the army tomorrow. Today is my last day as a scholar." "No way." Yi Xianxian covered her mouth, her pretty face filled with shock. It's hard to believe that the emperor would actually exile a newly promoted scholar to the army, since everyone is thinking about how Liu Feng will rise to prominence and achieve great success. Liu Feng was filled with grief and indignation, but had nowhere to vent it. He could only sigh and say, "Forget it, let's go home and pack our bags." Chapter 43. The Lord of the Manor appears suddenly. At night, the stars shone brightly, sprinkling their light on the earth. In the courtyard of Chongwen Hall, a man and a woman walked side by side, standing by the lake. The two figures were Liu Feng and Yi Xianxian. After packing their luggage, the two came to the courtyard to spend this night of parting together. After learning what happened in the imperial study, Yi Xianxian was shocked for a long time. After all, it was too illogical for a scholar of the empire to be exiled to the army so easily. The two remained silent for a long time before Liu Feng finally spoke. "So be it. I'll just join the army. Anyway, I don't really want to be a scholar. But the conditions in the military camp are said to be very harsh."
"Can you handle it?"
Yi Xianxian asked with a worried expression. Generally, the places of exile were either remote and bitterly cold regions in the northern frontier, or the miasma forests in the western part of the empire. In addition, there were some mines and salt fields in the empire. In short, they were all extremely dangerous and harsh places. Liu Feng shook his head, his gaze resolute. A true man should aspire to great things. If he can't even endure the hardships of military life, what great achievements can he possibly make in the future? He had figured it out. Perhaps being sent to the army wasn't as bad as he had imagined. In the military camp, he might even have more opportunities to hone his skills and improve his cultivation, and he could still achieve great things. Looking at the young man in front of her, Yi Xianxian fell silent. After a long while, she took out a golden token from her bosom. The character Yi on it was extremely familiar. It was Yi Tianhao's Lord's token. "Take this token from the prefect. Once you get to the military camp, take good care of yourself. If you encounter danger, this token might save your life." The girl gritted her teeth and handed the token to Liu Feng. No need. Liu Feng did not reach out to take it. A lord's token was of great importance, symbolizing the authority of the Lord of Xianzhou. Yi Xianxian herself could not do without this lord's token. Losing it would be equivalent to losing the Lord of Xuanzhou's deterrence. For example, if you encounter a life-or-death crisis while traveling, showing your Lord of the Prefecture token might allow your enemies to fear the Lord of Xianzhou and save your life. This is a protective charm and also a life-saving charm. How could Liu Feng accept something so important? Even before, he had only borrowed it for a day. "Take it," Yi Xianxian said without taking it back. She continued, "You have already offended the second prince. Even if you go to the military camp, I believe he will not let you off so easily. This man is not as simple as you think. Only by accepting this order from the prefect will those generals be intimidated and thus be more wary of you. To offend a prefecture lord in order to please the second prince, the pros and cons of this situation need to be carefully weighed." Liu Feng hesitated. He knew the other party was right. He was like a tiger without claws, with no one to protect him. The crown prince might have goodwill towards him, but he would definitely not pay special attention to his life or death. Most of the generals in the empire were high-level swordsmen. It would be too easy for such experts to kill him. It wouldn't take much effort at all. Unable to refuse Yi Xuanxuan's kindness any longer, and also for the sake of his own life, he had no choice but to accept the token, even though he didn't want to accept it at the moment. Liu Feng sighed. I'm going to the military camp, so I guess we won't have many chances to meet again, you? I will wait for you. Yi Xianxian interrupted him before he could finish, saying something that made his heart tremble. I will wait for you. Just 4 words, nothing more. These 4 words are enough to explain everything. No matter what, she will wait for him to come back. At this moment, Liu Feng could no longer suppress his emotions and pulled the blue-clad figure in front of him into his arms. Under the starry sky, the two embraced tightly, unable to part for a long time. After a long while, Liu Feng finally released his embrace, gently stroking Yi Xuanxuan's long, loose hair, and said softly, I will be back soon. The girl in his arms only let out a soft moan. At this moment, Liu Feng felt a warmth in his heart. The unpleasantness that had accumulated in the imperial study was swept away in an instant. With a woman like you, what more could a husband ask for? However, at that moment, a dark shadow suddenly appeared behind the two of them, silently and coldly watching the young man and woman in front of them. Who? With his keen mental power, Liu Feng's expression changed the moment the grass on the ground was squeezed. He turned around warily and saw the figure in the darkness. Upon seeing this, a hint of surprise flashed in the shadowy figure's eyes. How did this kid discover him? Even if the other party was a swordsman, he should not have been able to detect his presence. Who are you? Yi Xuanxuan's expression was also cold, but there was a hint of doubt on her face. The outline of the dark figure in front of her was very familiar. There are only 2 possibilities for this person to appear silently behind them. Either they have cultivated some kind of martial art that conceals their aura, or their cultivation level is completely different from hers, far superior. Without uttering a sound, the dark figure suddenly attacked while they were on guard. It moved with incredible speed, its hand reaching out in a claw shape, aiming straight for Yi Xianxian. Watch out. Pushing the girl aside, Liu Feng drew his demon-slaying sword at lightning speed, quickly channeling his magic into it and unleashing a powerful strike. Click! The sword light was shattered instantly, and the powerful claw light shattered the magic barrier on Liu Feng's body in one fell swoop, finally striking Liu Feng's chest to the palm. Bang! Spitting out a mouthful of blood, Liu Feng was sent flying backward, only managing to stop after taking more than 10 steps, his breathing disordered. Just as the shadowy figure was about to strike again, a cold voice from behind him made him freeze in his tracks. Father, stop. The speaker was Yi Xianxian, and her gaze was fixed on the dark figure in front of her. Upon hearing this, Liu Feng was shocked. This man in black was actually Yi Tianhao, the lord of Xianzhou Prefecture. The legendary sword sect expert, the most powerful person in the entire Xianzhou Prefecture. Yi Xianxian slowly approached the man in black. She was all too familiar with her father's aura, and although he was masked, she still recognized him. You still have the nerve to call me father? The man in black removed his mask, revealing a very dignified face, but that face was now filled with coldness. You actually rejected the second prince's kindness for this worthless brat. You should know what I told you back then. Yi Xianxian gritted her teeth. I don't want to get too close to the second prince. What did you say? Yi Tianhao was furious. With a loud slap, he actually slapped the other person across the face. Seeing this, Liu Feng's face darkened. Uncle Yi, don't go too far. Even though he didn't know anything before, he could tell that Yi Tianhao was clearly inclined to side with the second prince. He even wanted to use Yi Xianxian to pave the way for him and tie himself more closely to the second prince. Yi Tianhao scoffed, a hint of disdain flashing in his eyes. Kid, you dare to meddle in my family affairs? Do you think you can stand against me just because you have the status of a mere scholar? A scholar is a 4th-rank official, while a prefect is a 2nd-rank official, whose status is only below the 3 dukes. They are not on the same level. I don't care what you think. Liu Feng's tone turned much colder. But please don't make Xian do anything difficult. You should respect her own choice. Her own choice and you, a lowly boy, are the only ones to be chosen? Yi Tianhao's mockery deepened, and then he sneered. Let me tell you, there is no possibility between you two. I advise you to give up on that idea. My son-in-law, Yi Tianhao's son, can never be just the son of a marquis. Marriages among the upper nobility of the empire placed great emphasis on social standing. A family like Liu Feng's could only be considered a minor noble family, while the Yi family was the most powerful family in Xianzhou Prefecture, a vast difference in status. Furthermore, Yi Tianhao had long planned to marry Yi Xianxian to the second prince. As it stands, the second prince does not yet have a principal wife. If Yi Xianxian were to marry him, given his status, she would undoubtedly become his principal wife. Once the second prince successfully ascends the throne, he will become the emperor's father-in-law, and his Yi family will be able to join the ranks of the empire's top families, no longer confined to the Xianzhou region. Liu Feng felt a chill run down his spine. It turned out that the Xianzhou prefecture lord, whom he had always respected, was such a greedy and power-hungry person who would even sacrifice his own daughter's happiness for power. Your wish is likely to be dashed, second prince. There is absolutely no possibility of you inheriting the throne, neither now nor in the future, Liu Feng said decisively. The second prince, a man with whom he originally had little interaction, had gradually become his adversary. Now, he had another reason to deal with the second prince. Chapter 40, for the one-year agreement. Whether the second prince can ascend the throne or not is not for you to decide. Yi Tianhao did not take Liu Feng's words to heart. Instead, he thought that the other party was already furious, which was why he said such a childish thing. Whether this is naive or not, perhaps only time will tell. Right now I'm nobody, but do you dare to make a bet with me? A fighting spirit gleamed in Liu Feng's eyes, and his voice rose considerably. In less than a year, I will be someone who stands on equal footing with you. At that time, will you still dare to look down on me? If I fail to do so, I will leave Xianxian from now on and never see her again in this life. But if I do it, you must entrust Xianxian to me without any hindrance. How about it? His voice was clear and resonant, and even in the dead of night, it couldn't conceal the sharpness and high spirits in his words. Yi Tianhao's expression changed, a hint of surprise flashing in his eyes. He didn't know where Liu Feng got the confidence to make such a bold statement, claiming that he would reach his level within a year. This was no longer just a boast, but an extreme act of arrogance, a pipe dream, and simply impossible to achieve. Even Yi Xianxian, who had been watching Liu Feng create miracles, was somewhat worried. After all, it took the Yi family generations of effort to reach the position of the head of the manor. For Liu Feng to achieve this goal within a year was extremely difficult, perhaps even more difficult than ascending to heaven. I admire your courage, but I'm afraid your wish will not come true. Why don't I make this bet with you? No one thought such a bold statement could possibly come true, and Yi Tianhao thought so too. Since it was impossible to achieve, what would be the point of agreeing? Liu Feng clenched his fists tightly, his desire for power stronger than ever before. He needed to become stronger to protect what he deserved and to protect the woman he loved. Let's go. With Yi Xianxian mentioned, the father and daughter disappeared into the night. You must wait for me to come back. Liu Feng gritted his teeth and shouted loudly into the void in front of him. The echoes traveled a great distance before dissipating. The next day, news of Liu Feng's exile to the army spread like wildfire throughout every corner of Xiuejing City. Whether they were imperial nobles or ordinary people, everyone who heard the news was shocked and even incredulous. What crime had this scholar, personally appointed by His Majesty the Emperor, committed to deserve such severe punishment? It was unprecedented in the history of the empire for a scholar to be exiled to the army, because the emperor's punishment of scholars was usually relatively lenient. Most scholars, even if they committed serious crimes, were merely dismissed from their posts and reduced to commoners, while serious crimes resulted in execution. As for being exiled to the army, Liu Feng was the first. Therefore, Liu Feng was honored to break another record of the empire, and so far he has multiple records to his name. Outside Xiujing City, in the grand parade ground of the capital, a large crowd gathered, with more than 1,000 imperial guards assembled there, led by an imperial guard commander. Mixed among them were 4,000 or 5,000 ordinary soldiers, forming a large square formation. This army was formed under the orders of the Imperial Ministry of War to reinforce the Wuxi mine in the northern barbarian state, where a recent riot had disrupted the normal production of a large amount of refined gold and iron ore, severely impacting the supply of the Imperial Army. It is important to know that refined iron ore is an excellent material for making magical artifacts. The largest source of refined iron ore in the entire Northern Snow Empire is the Wuxi mine. If something goes wrong there, the Empire's artifact forging will be affected, which would be an incalculable loss. With over 1,000 Imperial Guards and 4,000 to 5,000 ordinary soldiers, this battle formation was truly magnificent. When Liu Feng arrived at the training ground, he even discovered large-scale war machines such as thunderfire chariots and repeating crossbows among the troops. With such weapons in the hands of the Imperial Guards, even a general-level expert would find it nearly impossible to escape death in a direct confrontation. Isn't this a bit too much? Just for a mine, does it really need so many people to be mobilized at once? Liu Feng couldn't help but feel suspicious. Even if that place was a military stronghold that produced refined gold and iron ore, a garrison of 1,000 or 2,000 troops would be enough to solve the problem. After all, it was just a mine, not the front line. Could there be something fishy going on here? Both types of large machinery were pulled by horses. The divine crossbow was enormous, about 10 feet long, with a huge iron box attached to its bottom containing various complex parts. A single carriage could only carry one divine crossbow. The thunderfire chariot, however, was not pulled by horses. Instead, it was powered by a rare gemstone called a spirit stone. This gemstone was only produced on a small scale in places with extremely rich spiritual energy, making it extremely precious. Therefore, it was impossible to use spirit stones for transportation. Instead, horses were used instead. Each carriage was guarded by a soldier from the Imperial Guard, who stood at the front and back with a serious expression and his eyes frequently scanning the surroundings warily. It seems my place of exile is the Wuxi mine. Now, I am truly penniless and need to start from scratch. Surrounded by a vast army, Liu Feng showed no sign of discouragement. This adversity could not break him. Instead, it fueled his fighting spirit. "Hey kid, come here." A loud voice suddenly rang in their ears, and a bronze-skinned, imposing-looking commander of the Imperial Guard strode over, holding a roster in his hands. "You are the newly arrived conscript, Liu Feng?" Upon hearing the words exile, Liu Feng took a deep breath. "Exactly. I've heard your story too, but I don't care what you did before. This is a military camp, and from now on you're a junior soldier who must unconditionally obey orders and military discipline." "Understood." Liu Feng clasped his hands in a fist salute. "Here are your dog tags. Hurry up and go inside. The troops are about to depart." The Imperial Guard commander handed Liu Feng his general's plaque, gave him a deep look, and then waved for him to come over. A moment later, the massive procession slowly started moving, raising clouds of dust as it rolled away. Manzhou Prefecture. A colossal mountain range stretched across the sky, its peaks ablaze with flames, billowing plumes of smoke rising into the air, merging into a continuous cloud that obscured the heavens. The entire mountainside was teeming with people. Hundreds of thousands of miners, prisoners, captives, and laborers toiled on the mines, constantly pushing carts to haul ore from the depths of the earth. The clanging and banging of mining tools, along with the shouts of heave-ho, could be clearly heard from miles away. This was Liu Feng's destination, the Wuxi mine. When he saw this scene, he was stunned. Rolling heat waves swept down from the mountain, and the scorching temperature made him feel as if he had entered a blazing furnace. "Commander, you must be tired from your journey. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Please hand over the weapons to my men." At the foot of the mountain, hundreds of soldiers stood in formation, seemingly having waited for a long time. Leading them was a general clad in heavy black armor, with thick eyebrows, large eyes, and a full beard, exuding an air of authority. "All right, then I'll leave it to you. Deploy the repeating crossbows at key points in the mine and reinforce them with heavy troops." The Imperial Guard commander waved his hand and gave the order. "Yes, ma'am." The bearded general waved his hand, and almost all the soldiers behind him rushed over, solemnly and carefully escorting the dozen or so carriages up the mountain. Next, the army guarding the mine led the way, while the more than 5,000 soldiers who came from Shuejing City were divided into two groups. The Imperial Guards and some elite soldiers set up camp at the foot of the mountain, while most of the ordinary soldiers followed the soldiers guarding the mine up the mountain. The Imperial Guards of the Empire were extremely powerful and would certainly not go up the mountain to supervise the work. Liu Feng was naturally assigned to the miscellaneous troops and followed behind the miners. The terrain of the Wuxi mine is extremely steep, with only one man-made road leading up the mountain, barely wide enough for a horse-drawn carriage to pass. The road is heavily guarded, with sentries every 3 or 5 steps, making the defense extremely tight. The higher you climb, the higher the temperature gets, and the stench of sweat fills the air. Through the billowing smoke from the summit, you can see countless cauldrons of all sizes standing atop the mountain. Beside each cauldron, 4 or 5 people are fanning the flames, but the most conspicuous among them are the Taoist robe-clad figures. Liu Feng had heard before that these people were not officials of the imperial court, but rather Taoist priests hired by the empire to smelt weapons in the mines. They were not under the jurisdiction of the imperial court, and the imperial court paid them some spirit stones or other rare minerals and precious herbs every month as payment. These Taoist priests are said to have all come from outside the empire. They entered the empire because they were attracted by the abundant resources of the Northern Snow Empire and accepted employment from the imperial court. The same is true for the Luchuan Empire.